Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of wovenwings Live, where we bring you wisdom and tools for vibrant living. I'm Gabe Crane. I'm joined by my co-host Rahul Deedwania, as always. And if you enjoy listening to us, please share our work with a friend. You can leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can join our newsletter, which is linked in the show description, to follow along the journey. And so today I'm excited. We have an awesome leadership guru, someone who has been ranked globally in the top 10 by global gurus as a leadership leader out in front. His name is Aldo Civico, who's joining us from Medellin, Colombia. And our title today of our episode, our topic is Massive Transformative Purpose. And Aldo is going to be getting into us with that and its application across multiple strands. And so Aldo, thanks for joining us today. Before I bring you fully on and introduce you fully, just want to flip over to you, Rahul, and see what are you thinking, how are you feeling about the show today, and how are you feeling about this idea of massive transformative purpose?
Thank you, Gabe. These words, right? Massive, transformative, and purpose are all supercharged, right? You know, massive is playing big, transformative evokes something that's more than just change, right? It's metamorphosis. There's a potency to it, and purpose, of course, is something that we talk about a lot, right? As something that runs very deep and is very foundational. And so when I think about this idea of massive transformative purpose, it feels very applicable, I think, to a couple of different hats I wear, right? One as a coach and the other as a leadership trainer and consultant. And as a leader of a team or of an organization, often you're concerned with this question, right? Which is, what is that transformative purpose for you, for your team, for the organization? And how do you connect people to it, right? So sometimes you might not know what it is. Sometimes you do know what it is. Even if you do know what it is, how do you actually make its way through the DNA of an organization? And then really even on an individual level though, right? I think we talk a lot as coaches about purpose being a very foundational piece, right? Starting with the why, right? And how do we sort of imbue ourselves with a sense of purpose, and so that we lend meaning, to our lives, we find energy, we find drive, to build on from that purpose. And for me, this whole concept, right, is part vision and imagination. It's part storytelling. So even if you have a sense for a purpose, how do you craft it? How do you give it shape? And then it's, once you have that, how do you stay connected to it? Whether as an individual, whether as a leader trying to bring their organization into it, all of that, there's an art and there's a science to each step of that process. And then I think also after that, the question is, even once you've done that, right, there's still a lot more that follows, right? And so the question that I ask then is, and then what? So I have a purpose, I'm connected to it, it's massive, it's big, it's transformative, but then there are all these other things that might get in the way from actually living that purpose. And so I'm really excited to explore all of that from a couple of these different lenses and see where that conversation takes us.
Yeah, totally. I really appreciate what you shared there. And, that question of how does it become real? I think that's something I'm going to be listening between the lines for and asking Aldo about today. Because, as coaches, as people in, organizational psychology, as you said, some of these words get tossed around a lot. So how do they become real? What do they really mean? And how can we really make use of them in our lives? I think we have the perfect guest for that today. I've been bugging Aldo about coming on the show for a few months now, and he's been super gracious and willing to join us. But I met Aldo on a peacekeeping course down in Colombia, in Medellin, with a group from Columbia University. And Aldo's background runs through Columbia University as well. And Aldo just gave a talk with us in like a tiny room where we were at this hotel we were staying. That was very inspiring. Just I think Aldo is somebody who, as his bio attests to, he has been involved in a lot. Aldo is someone with 30 years of experience. He's worked globally, training and mentoring in corporate leadership, personal leadership, Fortune 500 companies. Abigail Disney has called Aldo the leader's whisperer. And before leadership work and coaching, Aldo is an anthropologist by training, and he's been involved in negotiating and facilitating peace talks between the government and armed groups in Colombia. He's lectured at major universities around the US, Harvard, New York University, Princeton, Oxford, and he's also served as the director of the Center for International Conflict Resolution at Columbia. And so we're really lucky to have him on with us today. And most recently, as I think I mentioned at the top of the show, Aldo is ranked in the top 10 of the Global Gurus ranking as a global leadership authority. So Aldo, thanks for being with us today. And it's awesome to finally have you on the show.
Hey, thank you, Gabe. Nice to see you again after our encounter in Medellin. And nice to meet you, Rahul. And thank you for this invitation and being able to share this moment with you and with your audience. I'm really glad that we have this opportunity.
Awesome. So just as a starting point, Aldo, massive transformative purpose. Okay, so I think we're going to get into applying this across different lenses and platforms. But, this is a concept that comes from the tech field, which you do a lot of consulting within. So can you just walk us through a baseline of what are we talking about here? How does this stop being like just three big words on a page?
Yeah, I think, as you said, it comes from the world of innovation, of technology. It is something that especially Peter Diamandis and his community at the Singularity University crafted a few years back. And it meant to indicate to entrepreneurs that in a very disruptive and exponential times, if you want to be successful today, you need to tackle the big challenges and the big problems that are affecting humanity. And by doing that, and therefore, finding a purpose that is massive because it benefits not just a small community, not just you, your family, not even just a country or a city, but potentially the entire humanity, then it is really also transformative, right? If you tackle problems like aging, like climate change and all of that, then, you do good to humanity, but you are going to be also extremely successful as an entrepreneur. And as a matter of fact, if we look at the companies that today are making most of the money are companies that are in that direction. I found this term always very fascinating because in the field of personal development, we tend to talk more about vision, or we tend to talk more about life purpose, right? And but increasingly, I think that those terms, first of all, they're a little bit old, right? And so they don't have, I think, the same magnetism and magic to pull us into something that is motivating and fascinating. But also, I think they are too confined and probably too little in terms of pushing us and thinking big for our own lives. And I always thought, well, if I have to think very big, very, very big for my company, for my organization, why shouldn't I think also very big for my own life, right? If I think of a massive transformational purpose for my company, why shouldn't I also, first of all, and in terms of hierarchy of values and priorities, think about what is my MTP for my own life, right? Because I can't lead a organization, an exponential organization, if my life is not exponential, right? And that then implies some work, and I think that terms help us to give us the scope of the work and also the kind of gap that we might want to have to close between who we are today and who we need to become in order to leave that important mark around us and in humanity more in general.
Yeah, thank you for that overview, Aldo. And I live in San Francisco, so I'm surrounded by this rhetoric all the time, and to a point where there's that show, Silicon Valley, right, that kind of makes fun even of this rhetoric. And I'm noticing some of that coming up for me right now, where I'm hearing, the ambition and the purity in the way that you're describing it. And I'm also connecting it back to my experience where, I think this way of thinking big does indeed produce incredible results, and people stretching themselves, people stretching teams and organizations, and collectively accomplishing so much more, than they might be able to if they're not thinking as big. But in parallel to that, I'm feeling a reaction to this idea of like things having to be big, things having to be massive. This, what I would argue, is almost an overemphasis on scale, at the cost of doing things right at the micro level. I think that can be applied in a few different areas, or even this idea of scale leading to people feeling insufficient if they're not doing something at scale, or maybe at the personal level. If you're thinking so big that, where you want to be is so far away, does it, almost imply that where you are now is somewhere small? So these are just some other feelings, I think, that are popping up. And I think the question I wanted to pose to you, Aldo, is what's important about this idea of things being massive, thinking really big? Like, what's really at the core of that?
So first of all, I would make a distinction between having a massive transformative purpose, which can be, the scale of which you are telling, and then the mission, which is to say, okay, this is the person, but what I'm going to do, my contribution is going to be this, right? So, I was talking to a friend of mine in Medellin the other day, and his massive transformative purpose is to end hunger in the world, right? But that doesn't mean that he's going to work worldwide. His life will not give him enough time and resources to that. So he does that. Then he said, how I contribute? Well, I contribute by focusing on Medellin, right? So I think, first of all, I would make a distinction between saying, hey, this is my purpose, and then this is specifically, the vehicle, the platform that I'm going to use as a mission in order to contribute to that purpose. But it's also true what you're saying, right? And I have people coming up to me and say, do I really need a life purpose? Because it became fashion, right? To say, hey, I have a life purpose, or thinking life purpose. And I think that after COVID, probably, at least in certain areas of the world, that question came up even more forcefully. To my, it's always interesting when we resist to thinking big, because that for me is already a point of inquiry. Isn't that fascinating, right? That thinking big, we start feeling all sorts of overwhelm or anxiety or fears, because that's already my mindset and my mental map revealing to myself, right? So I love it when my clients start getting anxious about thinking big, because it means there is work already there to be done. Right? So there you have the first advantage of actually thinking big, seeing how big are you actually able to think, right? How big is your big, if you want, right? I mean, think about Elon Musk, right? When Elon Musk, as a process of resolving his own anxieties and traumas of teenage and adolescence, and all his personal research, he comes up with this idea after reading, science fiction, and saying, hey, why is science fiction science fiction? Let's make it less fiction, make it more reality. And, let's go to Mars and have this interplanetary humanity. Well, the fact that he doesn't only think like that, but then he goes to work and says, hey, let's find a way to do it, right? That tells you where he is in terms of mind map. It's less interesting if you think it's a good idea, a crazy idea, a doable idea, a waste of resources, or something very necessary for humanity. That's a different debate. What fascinates me is to think that someone can actually think and orient his entire life and actions and priorities and values and skills towards that goal, because that gives you the kind of measure who he needs to become in order for that to become a reality. And that, to me, is the real purpose of a massive transformative purpose, is that it will give me the measure of what is the gap that I need to close in order to become that person that can give a contribution to that person. It's less important if finally we will able to tackle the challenge. That's, if we are, great. But it's more of a journey, I think, that is more important than the result in itself. And sometimes we are so preoccupied with success, with getting the golden medal, that we don't appreciate the growth that goes into actually becoming competitive to a point where you can win the golden medal, right? So that's, in my opinion, the word. And if you're afraid of thinking big, then, wow, isn't that fascinating?
So one of the things that's coming up for me, Aldo, it's probably, we would probably categorize this within limiting beliefs, but I think it's a concern, is the link of this with something more like megalomania, or having a vision of doing something that, a more critical vantage point would say is egotistical, or comes with a lot of downsides. Or, you mentioned Elon Musk, and I think he's kind of the lightning rod for that very thing, depending on where you are, in your own journey or along the spectrum right now, is like the way you perceive Elon Musk and what he's doing. Some people think it's the most amazing thing ever, and some people have a lot of criticisms. So my question here is, how do we distinguish a good, massive transformative purpose from something that maybe could be harmful or egoic or self-serving in a way that, blends then into delusion? And how do we make distinctions? I really think about it in terms of like mental health. We want to encourage people to think big, but we also, there's that kind of cautionary tale about encouraging people to think in ways that are delusional, that then, send them off in directions that cause harm to them, harm to others, harm to the world. So how do we disentangle those so we can think big and not get caught up into some of those things, or move past that internal judgment that we might be having about our process?
Well, wasn't Gandhi delusional when he thought of freeing India from the dominance of the British? It wasn't Nelson Mandela, who stayed in a small prison and cell, a few square meters, 27 years. Wasn't he delusional, thinking that apartheid could be defeated? Wasn't it delusional to think that we could go on the moon, right? So we when we think the impossible, we a lot of people and ourselves, we might think we are delusional, right? To bring it closer to me, I worked many years back in Italy, where I come from, with an anti-mafia fighter and political leaders who just had this dream of freeing the city of Palermo, who was known, in the 80s as the world capital of the Cosa Nostra and the Italian mafia. Freed that city from the mafia, right? Wasn't that delusional to think something like that? And I think you need a certain level of craziness, depending on what is your measure of normal, if you want to do something big, right? Otherwise you just do more of the same, or a variation of what's already out there. But we were talking about transformative. If you want to transform, you need to have actually a big dream, right? Now, how do we protect ourselves from just being a crazy fantasy and being egotistic, or at least just egotistic? I think we need to think about who is it benefiting. At the end of the day, who is it impacting, right? So is it impacting the entire people, entire humanity, an entire city? Well, then there is a dimension of service, there is a dimension of altruism, there is a dimension of impact that transcends just who you are. And there is nothing wrong, in my opinion, also to be extremely ambitious. No doubt that Elon Musk is very ambitious, but so was Mother Teresa, and so is Nelson Mandela, and so is Gandhi, and so is my guy in Luke Orlando, who fighting the mafia, right? So what I think is important is that ambition actually comes into alignment with that purpose, right? I don't think there's nothing wrong in being ambitious. I think it's actually necessary to be ambitious. Otherwise, how can you live anything or do anything big if you're not ambitious, right? Now, the quality of ambition and how ambition can evolve, that's another matter, right? But you need to have passion. Can you do something like, Elon Musk is absolutely passionate, right? Can you get to Mars if you don't have that passion? And it's actually a level of passion that is certainly out of the medium, right? But if you look at the history of humanity, whoever left something meaningful behind, positive or negative, but let's concentrate more on the positive, is because they didn't do things as usual, right? They were huge disruptors. They just thought differently, thought big, and had a different sets of values, developed a different set of skills and behaviors, and were able to mobilize, people and wills and resources in order to get it done. Now, do we all need to be Albert Einstein or Gandhi? No, I don't think that's the measure. The comparison is not with the Elon Musk of our world. The comparison is with where we come from, and what were the moments in our life of disruption where we decided, to take a different route? Where are the moments where we decide to go exponential and give quality and excellence to our life? And how do I compare myself today with the previous version? That's really, if you want, the competition that matters, right? Not the comparison with Elon Musk, because then if Elon Musk becomes my model and say, I want to be like him, then of course I get blocked right away. First of all, because I don't know anything about engineering. I don't think my brain was built for engineering. I'm not even attracted to science fiction. So, right there, I have a lots of blocks. But he can inspire me and say, hey, think, what is your version of thinking big? What is your version of transcending where you are right now? What is the kind of gap that you need to work on so that, in the lives that you have, in the decades that you have, you're actually leaving behind something that is meaningful. But it's more for your own growth and meaning rather than, I would say, for the impact that you make in the world,
Yeah, Aldo, I've heard you emphasize that point, and that's one I wanted to pick up on, which is what I'm hearing is the big purpose, the big dream, has two functions. One is to give you a roadmap or something to strive for so that you do something that is transformative. And then the other is to give you something to compare against for yourself. Like, hey, this is where I want to be, what I want to be capable of. And this is where I'm at right now. So there's a gap, and that gives you the playground in which to experiment and find your own personal growth. And so once you have that, right, again, I think what's underlying here is this idea that you're seeking transformation, right? And transformation is good. Transformation is valuable. And kind of just wanted to pose that to you as a question, which is, what is nice or valuable or about transformation, and why should we seek it out, or why should we strive, even for personal transformation, as opposed to maybe the opposite, right? Which is contentment or maybe stagnancy. I don't know, but we'd love to hear, why does transformation matter?
Well, first of all, even in nature, right? Anything that doesn't grow and evolve dies, right? So if you if you want to stay alive in your soul, you need to grow, otherwise you die, right? And just let's look around us. There's a lot of walking deads, soul deads walking around us, and I think it is because they are, for certainly a lot of circumstances in their life and opportunities, or lack of opportunities, or lack of, taking self-responsibility for your own life, end up being so oppressed by external conditioning and circumstances that they have forgotten the most important thing, which is the connection with yourself, the bigger self, and then see how it can grow and play out in the world, right? That, I think, is the most important. Might sound egoistic, but it's also the only way I can then contribute is if I stay alive, if I'm alive, if I'm awake. So that's really the purpose of transformation. And it's not even linear to a point where you say, well, now it's done and now I can do something. No, it's never finished, really. It's never ended, because the growth needs to be continues. And I can say I'm 54 now, and looking back, I can tell you that every decade has its challenge, right? And every of that challenge means a growth. But when I finally went over my 40 years life crisis, it was not done with in terms of life crisis. I tell my friends who are in the 40s now, I say it was just the preparation for my crisis of the 50s, right? And probably this one is, the one for the 70s, 60s, until I stay on Earth, right? So we can see also life just as a cycles of moving from crisis into crisis. So it's never ending. I mean, life will never end giving us opportunity to know ourselves better and anew and grow. And personally, that's where I find meaning and fun in life, is knowing myself more and more and more. And that takes so much of your energy and your time that's why I say, first of all, the world can't be changed. We should think about what the world is. And second, it takes so much of our effort and presence and attention and will and love and everything to just get for us to the next level of our own consciousness, which is then finally the biggest contribution we can give to humanity, that we should just worry about that instead of worrying about what's going on outside. That's, I learned it the hard way in my life. That's the easy way. And it's also a great way to feel good about ourselves. It's, I'm doing great stuff for the world. But in the process, you just don't look at yourself, which is, in my opinion, the hardest thing to do, right? Look at our own, like Nietzsche says, look into our abyss with the risk that the abyss looks back at us, right? That's the game of life, I think. That's the transformation.
I want to kind of break down some of the different things I'm hearing here, because we started out talking about massive transformative purpose. Mm-hmm. You gave the example of ending world hunger, right? Huge drive. And then I'm hearing things on the other side, which is around, it's ultimately about the transformation of your own consciousness internally. And that's the greatest contribution, right? And so I think that makes sense to me intuitively, but I think it could be confusing for folks as they're tuning in on this conversation. And it kind of makes me think of where the rubber meets the road. I think about an example in my own life. I've been really interested in spirituality and religion since I had some awakening experiences myself when I was 18, 19 in college. And that sent me on a whole trajectory and journey into looking at religion as coming from a more secular background, also looking at conflict resolution. I got really fascinated in the conflict in the Middle East that we're seeing playing out again now, in Israel and in Palestine. And I always was inspired by this idea that these different religions, if you talk to diehard Orthodox folks within any of them, they won't agree to this, but I think they're all kind of pointing to the same truths, the same common humanity, the same God. And yet we don't see that. I found myself, when I was in this program where I met you, Aldo, at Columbia, my capstone project was about this idea that I've had for a long time around elevating the power of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Temple Mount site, the Dome of the Rock site in Jerusalem. When you talk about like kind of massive transformative purpose, or, this like kind of highly contested site that is at the center, the spiritual epicenter of some of the conflicts that are going on right now. And my vision for that was, let's start bringing people together in dialogue around transforming this place into what it's supposed to be, as it's prophesied from within these religions, as a house of prayer for all nations, as a place that somehow brings people together, and we find that redemptive quality. So that's my big vision, right? But then I find myself living on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on Maui, on the exact opposite side of the world from that place, going through a divorce, have a young son, and I don't know if I have no idea. I'm never going to be over there, or I have some contacts over there. Who knows? I find myself involved. I'm the newly elected president of our local synagogue. And I find myself having these little interactions with folks, struggling to have 20, 25 people come to a small Shabbat service, trying to get other like board members to think expansively about how could this Jewish community interact with local Hawaiian communities or Christian communities, and how could we have conversations, and running into frustrating interactions for me with people where I find them closed off to that, not even open to very simple things. So I have my massive dream on the one hand, which, who knows what will happen with that. And then I have the realities of my life. And I think that that's something that a lot of people encounter. So if we were to just try to apply what you're saying to what I've described, what would I do? What do I do?
I think you described it beautifully, right? What I mean, because here you are with this big, massive transformative purpose with this peace, in Israel and in Palestine, right? And then you have your everyday shit to deal with. And so starting, for example, with what you just mentioned, being with father and going through a divorce, just by going through that, how much growth is there? And how much more how much will it make you ready to contribute to peace somewhere else when you go through that? And who knows how many inner conflicts and wounds and all of that you need actually to go through and grow, and in order to transcend your present moment. The guy who will work on this as a result of what you're experiencing and living go through today is going to completely different than the guy 5 years ago, right? Even before he became a father. So you might say even the same words today that you said 5 years ago, you might just use the same script, just to make an example, but the effect will be completely different because you are different. So that's the first thing. So we cannot escape. You can choose your daily battles, who are like the rockets of Elon Musk, not making it, exploding midair and coming back in pieces, right? It's part of your experiment. It's part of your growth, right? And it's part of that getting ready for whenever, time and geography will align, who knows how and who knows when, right? In order to give you a specific contribution to something that is very dear to your heart, right? But in the meantime, you have all these opportunities locally to talk about this. And wow, fantastic, you are encountering resistance. Well, that's your laboratory, that's your gym. Interesting, how I'm saying it, how I'm doing it this way, it doesn't go through. There is another way. I don't know which one it is. I will find out. That's growth, right? So that's how we take something that is very big and then we make it our lives. You could also, say, hey, I'm interested in Israel and Palestine, and you move away from all your responsibility, starting with, being a father, a community leader, and just move to a different territory to escape, actually, the terrain where you need to train yourself right now. So would that lead for a purpose? No, that would be using a purpose to escape from yourself. Instead, a purpose should take us to dive even more deep into ourselves so that we become those persons, those people who then make a contribution. And that might just take a lifetime. I tell you a little episode. There was a short time in my life, I don't know how many years it was, like 2 or 3, where I had the chance on and off to collaborate with former President Bill Clinton, right? And we took a trip to Rome, and we were just walking one night. He asked me, show me Rome by night. And we were walking in Via dei Condotti just completely by ourselves, in a few guards and his assistant. And at one point, he told me about the story of a conversation he had with Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela, when he went there and visited the cell, Nelson Mandela said, how did you make it through? How were you able to bear something like this? And he said, I wasn't bearing anything. I was just preparing myself. So those 27 years where Nelson Mandela might have a version of your questions, hey, I'm here in a small island, so far away from the theater of operations where I would like to be. What's the meaning? Well, the meaning is preparation, right? That's what Nelson Mandela, said to Bill Clinton. And I think he says to everyone, to us, every time we say, what's the meaning of being here when I would like to be somewhere else? I would like to do something. No, it's that's your cell. That's your training boot camp right now. And we can't escape that if you want to be serious.
Although I'm just thinking about what you're saying right now. And I think part of it, again, is really resonating with me, and there's implicit in what you're saying, I think, is understanding that everything we do that's in, that as long as we're in connection with ourselves as we're going through it, has some purpose and is part of our journey. And maybe we're not, it's not as obviously directly tied to some massive transformative purpose that we've dreamed up for ourselves, but it is tied. It is tied because we are tied to it and we are transforming through our day-to-day lived experience. And so that is really resonating with me. The other part I'm thinking about with that is how much of that way of looking at it is just a way of sort of reframing or recasting, our present day experiences so that we're kind of perpetually in a state of growth and transformation, because everything we do creates some sort of growth, creates some sort of opportunity for us to learn, for us to evolve and to, like you said, to try new things, to experiment. And yeah, I guess I'm curious, like how much of this is the story we tell ourselves and how we reframe it to ourselves, and how much of it is actually like, hey, that's just what has to happen. We're going to go through the path we're going to go through.
Well, I think everything we tell ourselves is a story. You need just to choose which is the story you want to live by. Everything is, action structure in that sense. And it's first in our head. And then, if it's in our head, we start playing it out, and that might affect reality around us, right? So it's really about the quality of a story. And that's why also, in my opinion, having this massive transformative purpose is an interesting question, because that becomes then your North Star. That becomes where you basically orient everything, from your behaviors, from your skills, from your why, from your who you are as an identity, and of course your vision and your mission, right? So it becomes an organizing principle for your life. And so you will decide which road to take, which path to choose in certain moments of life. And if you have that purpose, it becomes clear what you need to choose, or it becomes clearer what you need to choose. I think that's really the value of having a massive purpose. That's really why it's also valuable for organization. For organization, what does it do? It helps you to make choices, where to put resources. It also gives you ideas for new products and new services, because it gives you the flexibility to look at what's going on in the world rather than to get fixated with a specific product and a specific service. I don't know if you saw the movie on BlackBerry, which came out, I don't know, a few months ago. Very fascinating movie, And of course, BlackBerry was the greatest tool until Steve Jobs with the iPhone showed up, and BlackBerry was dead overnight. Why? Because they didn't have a massive transformative purpose. They were just enamored with the technology and with the product. And at one point, the product in itself became démodé. It became just a piece of archaeology overnight, right? It wouldn't have happened if they had a purpose which constantly updates you and makes you see what else can be done and how can we do better and how can we achieve it closer, right? Even if you never really achieve it, because that's part of what it means to have a massive transformative purpose, is that it's so big that you can go close to it, but probably not achieving it completely. So that's, I think, is the function, right? It's really an organizing principle. And in that sense, also an organizing principle of your narrative, of the story you want to tell yourself, others, and a story that you want to live.
So within that story there, Aldo, I think there's also just the forces of capitalism, as you alluded to, hyper competitiveness. And, it makes me think of, although I think I'm maybe a little bit further along here on the ride with you, or in the car than I feel like Rahul is, naming some of like the skepticisms. But like, I feel my skepticism come up in that story, because it's like, well, yeah, BlackBerry, that's the story we form about BlackBerry after the fact, but it may just have been that they were just out-competed, and then there was nothing to do, and then they died, because that's what happens in a competitive environment when there's no more resources to be had for you. And then I think about, you were talking about earlier, people living from their purpose and lifelong growth. And these are things that I certainly subscribe to myself. But you talked about the soulless people, the walking dead, right? Which is I think so easily can become any of us. I certainly fall into that at different times. And part of that, I think, is an exhaustion from that competitive landscape. Like, it's okay, I'm constantly competing and involving myself and growing, but that takes energy. And then at a certain point, I just want to experience peace. There's actually a lot about that on Maui, because there's, it's like a retirement kind of place. There's a lot of people that are like, I'm done. I just want to like sit on the beach. And through that, they find some sort of meaning and peace. My question here is, how do we keep ourselves from dying, becoming that in this kind of competitive landscape? And is there something wrong with stepping out of the rat race, so to speak, that whole competitive framework, and retiring into the appreciation of nature, the transformative scale of like the Hawaiian Islands slowly eroding from rain, and like my job is, kind of like a Taoist poet, is just to like watch it and write poems about it. So how do we reconcile that?
No, I we are the authors and the creators of our lives. So the question is, what is it that I really want to create? Do I want to create a life where, after working a few years very hard, I made a lot of money, and I want to spend the rest on the beach in Malawi and enjoy the sun? And great. If that's what makes you happy, then create that life for you, right? There's nothing right or wrong. It might be a life that I like or I don't like, that inspires me or don't inspires me, but that's subjective, right? It's not objective. So I would say that's what I want to create. Let's do it. But in general, even if you are more sort of an activist who feels that needs to be out in the world and fighting, and the fight through the jungle, and so that you come out on the outside. Well, it's also good to have some balance in life. I wouldn't take probably Elon Musk as an example and inspiration for balance, right? Because I read once his weekly schedule, and how even his time with his kids is timed, and all of that. That wouldn't be something that I want to model from Elon Musk, right? But I have colleagues, for example, who the first thing they do in the year is to block the time where they are going to have downtime, where we're going to have vacation, where we're going to be in Malawi on a beach. And then they organize everything around that. I think that's, for example, inspires me much more, because that would give me certainly much more balance than not micromanaging my time so that it can be doubling my productivity and use every second I'm breathing to create something, to do something. We also need to know each other, and understanding how much energy we need, but it's certainly in general, for those of us who are not Elon Musk or anything like that, I think to have a balance where the moments of creativity and the moments of doing, of traveling, of being engaged is coupled with times where you retank yourself, spiritually, energetically, health-wise. It's very important. I have a very good friend of mine, Rainer, who is now in Kenya and does fantastic peace-building work. And he wrote recently a very important article about how, for your mental health and for being able to be a resource to the communities you serve, you need to retreat and find downtime and recharge yourself. And how many times that's coupled with a sense of guilt, because who am I? How can I take vacation when other people are suffering? Yeah, but if you don't take vacation, soon you're not going to be, any resource, because you're just depleted from any energy, and you will not be good for anything, not for yourself and not for your community you serve, right? So I think that's very important. But it comes from having a clear vision of what is the life you want to create, and how do you want to serve, and who do you need to become, and what kind of energy you need in order to do that, right? That, for me, is all part of it, of a growth. For me, growth is someone who is a hyperactive person. I met many human rights activists, right, who are there, or humanitarian aid people who are there and work to the point of burnout. and they find significance in actually getting the burnout, because that's the proof that you really sacrificed. Yeah, but then you can't work anymore. So, and so, what's that worth then when you have to step back for years before even going back into the field? Instead, the moment where you say, hey, before I get to the burnout, I need to retreat, find that for me is growth, right? When you find, because then that you understand, was it that I'm living for? Who do I need to become? And I need also to become a healthy person with the necessary energy to sustain that kind of work. And therefore, once in a while, I do need a Sabbath, right? In built in. So that I think is the work, and each one of us needs to find that fine tuning. And that's the growth process, right? That's the work that we do.
This particular theme, Aldo, is one that I can definitely relate to. A few years ago, having started a business, my mentality was very much like, go, go, go. Any minute not spent on the business is a minute lost. And there wasn't really an eye towards sustainability, because the thinking was, hey, I should be able to power through anything and everything, and I think there was definitely a growth process around seeing that was, limited view of looking at it, and an unrealistic one. The question that pops up for me, you kind of started alluding to it in the middle, is having that vision, that sense of direction, knowing where the gaps are, all of which come from having this purpose, right, to work back from, continues to be sort of the foundational piece. And so the simple question I want to ask is, how do we find our massive transformative purpose?
Yeah. I always say the best way to find it is to stop asking yourself, what is my purpose or my massive transformative purpose? Because until you are focused on that, you are focused on yourself. And until you are focused on yourself, you're not going to find that purpose. In my opinion, that purpose comes when you open the eyes outside yourself and you have an encounter, an experience that moves you deeply, where you say, I want to do something for this, right? The example I bring is from this guy, who became a very successful social entrepreneur, who went to Haiti 10 years after the earthquake, saw children still living in very poor housing, and said, I want to build houses and homes for these families. And then came up and then realized that this is a world crisis, and that if he would use the code of building that are existing, we would never be able in a lifetime to resolve that world crisis of quality living for everyone. And that's what brought him to creating design with engineers, a 3D printer that, in 24 hours builds 2 homes of cements for families, right? So now that he encountered with that experience, he encountered his purpose, which is ending the habitat crisis, the living sustainable and affordable living for everybody, so that everybody have a decent place to live, right? That became his life. Creating that, company that starts resolving that. That's his mission. But he wasn't concentrating on himself. He wasn't going around saying, "Oh, what's my purpose? What's the meaning of my life?" And no, he looked at outside and connected with a specific pain, a specific problem, challenge, and he said, "I want to do something about that." That's, I think, when we encounter a purpose. So I would say, if you don't have a purpose, or you think you don't have it, first of all, start thinking about it and start, looking at what's happening around you and what touches you. Many times, it's something that happens to you that opens that possibility. I have a very good dear friend of mine. She was a normal, average, middle class mother, divorced with a 16 years old kid, and then this kid went through trouble in school and was bullied because of his sexual orientation, and he committed suicide. Well, that completely turned about the normal, the everyday life of that mother, right, who was just a employee, just working. And now she created a fantastic foundation working to prevent suicide among teenagers, right? Well, in a very tragic way, if you want, but she found her purpose in that sense, right? So many times it's something that we have that we need to resolve, that we need to that gives us what the purpose is. I'm in these days I'm revisiting some historical documents that have to do with my grandfather. My grandfather was a major freedom fighter in Austria against Hitler during World War II, right? And he was there between 1983 and 1954 for a good 7 years. Well, it's not that he chose to be a freedom fighter. It was that the circumstances around him invited him to, risk his life and that of his family for the freedom of his country, and because Nazism and Hitler was everything against what he believed, right? So that was his, freedom and the freedom of his country, freedom from Hitler and Nazism. That became his life purpose, right? And his massive transformative purpose, if you want. And then there is the chance that you still don't find it. Well, then I always say, find a purpose that someone else is having and you like, and just copy it. Do you like something that Nelson Mandela did? Just copy it. The people who live for a purpose are not jealous or of their purpose. So just start somewhere. That's also my suggestion. Start just somewhere, and it doesn't have to be the definite. It doesn't have to be the definite formulation. It doesn't need to be perfect. Just start. It's better to start walking the path, but not just staying stagnant and asking, whoa, who knows what my path is? Just start walking, and then, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, I hope this is getting folks' wheels turning. As I'm listening to you, I'm certainly thinking about my own journey and story in the framing of what you're offering us, Aldo. And, just going back to this link around limitation, I think this last question was so helpful as far as giving people some specific way, a tangible way to actually put what we're talking to into practice. And when we were chatting before we, recorded this today, you were mentioning, the role of limitation, the role of trauma, past trauma, intergenerational trauma in limiting our ability to access this way of thinking, this way of opening up. And you mentioned a practice you have, which I think is called havening, as one method for starting to work with these things. And I don't know if you want to get into the whole methodology of that right now, you're welcome to. But I guess the question is, for people who are experiencing those limitations and those struggles with connecting with this, what are some things that we can do to open up more or work through some of our pains and blockages to be able to actually get into this work?
First of all, let's just be clear. There's no one living on Earth that doesn't have some sort of emotional trauma. You might not remember. No, it might not have been like surviving a plane crash or something, or having been kidnapped or something like big like that, right? But every time we encounter a small, trauma, is like an emotional wound that comes into our autonomous nervous system that gets more rigid, and we lose flexibility and adaptability, right? And it's not actually for bad reason. Most of the time it's because it's a mechanism of self-defense and self-protection, right? So we shouldn't even be too harsh on ourselves if we have those reactions, but we all have those reactions. So when we have this massive transformational purpose before us, and we understand by looking at our lives from that point of view of the purpose, we see the gap. But now that gap becomes a sort of a jungle that we need to fight through, right, in order for us to acquire all those abilities and qualities that will help us become the person we need to become in order to live our purpose to the fullest and giving a positive contribution. Now, when you stand before that jungle, you might feel fear and say, yeah, I know what I need to do, but do I really want to do it? Do I really want to walk into that threshold, and going through that transformation? And those resistances that come, are in general linked to some previous experiences that even physiologically created some rigidity in our nervous system. Now, it might be from us, or it might be from previous generation, right? Neuroscience has it clear now that we carry the information of 4 generations of traumas of our forebears. So even if you would be clean of trauma, which is impossible, you get all of those of the 4 generations before. So again, we can leave this as a limitation and say, fuck, I'm fearful and I don't think I'm good enough to do it, and we can stand there and so refuse to grow. Or say, wow, isn't it interesting that I have this specific fear, and this is an invitation for me to look at it and to move through it, right? And I, in my experience, in my own personal experience, but then I started observing also in the people I work with, really the gap between thinking big and thinking small, being able to live and enact your dream and your desires and you're getting to your goals and objectives, and not being able to do it or do it only partially is a lot of time related to those traumas that are even physiologically imprinted within us, and they're like small scars, right, that make us a little more rigid. So I've been looking for a long time, because I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm not interested in becoming a psychotherapist, but I was interested if there are tools that help us just to, if you want to hack through those fears and to those blockages and to those physiological reactions, so that we can be a little more agile in our walk through that jungle, or at least start that walk through a jungle. And in my research, at one point, I bumped into this psychosensory technique that is called havening. And, in the last 20 plus 30 years, together with psychotherapy, which is focused, as we know, on verbal and in reframing or new meaning to past experiences, together with the use of pharmacological assistance, right, in order to overcome traumas or anxieties or phobias or any other sorts of neuroses. These new psychosensory techniques have come to the fore, right? And probably the most known one are tapping, right? When we tap on the meridians in order to release trauma that is trapped in our body, or EMDR, which is with the eye movements, right? Those are the most known techniques. But havening is probably the most recent one, has been around for the past 30 years, was created by a couple of doctors, the brothers Rudin in New York, and it has to do with touch, right? With touch that you do basically on your arms, or on your palms, or here on your face. And what these touches do is that it creates a surplus of delta waves, and the delta waves, as we know, are the waves of deep sleep, of the sleep where we recover, we work our memories. So it's like giving the impression to the brain of having that deep sleep, restorative sleep. But at the same time, what it does is basically that it takes away some glue from the amygdala, where some receptors, called technically AMPA receptors, basically remain outside the amygdala as a sort of alarm system, so that every time something similar to the trauma you had actually, gets your whole system into reaction. So the simple touches over a few minutes, basically what it does is to restore the health of your amygdala, so that you don't have the same reactions before the same stimulus. And that just frees you emotionally from any form of anxiety, blockage, panic, fear, phobia, and makes you freer in handling your past and every possible futures, and to start many times that journey into the jungle, or continuing it in moments that are difficult. So today, I think there are lots of very simple tools that we can apply at zero cost, right? And that are helping us, into this journey. And I think that's part of the growth. We need to start combining more and more of those tools so that we become very well equipped from all points of view, physiologically, emotionally, spiritually, to actually become those persons that are giving a contribution by living their purpose. Having a purpose and not doing this work is like having a fantasy and remaining in the fantasy, right?
Yeah, although that what you just said actually strikes a deep chord for me. I think if I reflect a little bit on my own journey and sort of digest what we've been saying over the last 15, 20 minutes, I feel a lot closer to my own path as far as connecting with a sense of purpose and deeper purpose. And I think it has come a lot from just staying open, to what's happening and iterating and noticing, what I'm resonating with and what I'm not. And, I worked with Gabe and he was my coach a few years ago. Right. And that was also part of this process of really just observing my energy states and what was touching me. And that's sort of what's led me to this current iteration, having conversations like this one, working as a coach, working as a organizational design consultant and whatnot. And I think, for the first time in a long time over the last couple of years, I've felt very grounded in a sense of purpose. And I think it still oscillates in terms of how big I'm thinking. But that actually gets to the second point, which is, I feel grounded in the purpose, but I feel like there are a lot of blockers that get in the way of my feeling like I'm living that purpose every day. And it doesn't even have to be 100% of the time, but living it to the level that I'd like. And some of the things that you just alluded to, I felt myself mapping it to some of my day-to-day experiences, right? If I'm in front of something that's really big, I'm entering the forest or I'm already in the forest. Sometimes I want to truck forward and I'm feeling great about it and feeling expansive. And a lot of the times, I start to shrink, right? And I think where I am in my journey is I've started to notice that a lot more, and I'm feeling good that that's a step that's emerged. But I think, I still sometimes am at a loss for how to approach it or what to do about it, and I think if anything, I feel an overload of tools, that you could apply that, especially nowadays, there are just so many different things. And so people are like, oh, count to 5 or take a deep breath or, touch yourself or, just allow your body to move or go meditate. And I think all of them are powerful in their own ways. But just to get to the question, because again, I very much agree with your premise. Having the purpose is one thing, learning how to, relate to our limiting beliefs and reactive tendencies is the complementary piece to that. What would you advise for someone just seeking to find their own practices around this? How would you suggest that they go about finding what works for them and experimenting in a way that's generative and energizing rather than kind of scary and daunting?
Listen, first of all, I would say doing this journey on your own is very tough. So that's the last thing that I would suggest is just do it and try and error, until you figure it out. That can be very exhausting. So I would always recommend join a community, whatever community, It might be a group coaching thing. It can be a meditation course, whatever attracts you, right? The good thing of so much offer is that at this point you can really choose something that speaks to you, right? It's not that one thing is better than the other. Thanks God there's different schools of thoughts and sensitivities and tools so that you can really choose what you tune into, right? So, but don't do it alone, I always say, do you know anyone that goes for the gold on the Olympics and says, you know what, I'm just going to train by myself. I'm just going to buy a bunch of books, read them, implement, experiment. No, there's no one doing that. They all have, not just a coach, they have a team of support to get to that result, right? And I think if we want to be excellent, if we really want to live our purpose, we need to be guided by someone who has been doing it already, right? And do part of a journey with that person, right? It can be a guide, it can be a mentor, it can be a coach, it can be a community, whatever you want, but don't do it on your own, right? That for me is the most important thing. The advantage is also that you cut time, because instead of trying out 10 tools in order to find the one, if you have a very, very good mentor and guide, he can, downsize it to 2, 3 that might be the one that are good for you, and you just accelerate your process. It's not only the process of growth, it's the process out of suffering, which I think is the most valuable thing of actually doing the journey with someone, right? Why staying stuck? Why suffering? It's something that makes me mad, just get out of it and then move on, right? So that I would say that's really my suggestion. In terms of the tools, I agree completely with you. I mean, there are so many out there today. You can get lost, and this is again why I would say accept help from someone in that sense. But otherwise, just experiment and then see what happens. If it's the 5 seconds count and it works for you, great. It's 10 minutes meditation every day and conscious breathing that works for you, fantastic. Is it running half an hour? I always suggest to blend a few, right? People who tell me, I already do sport, I don't need meditation. Yes, and why you don't try and see what the difference is, because it's not the same. It's similar in certain things, but it's not the same, right? So you can start blending and see what the effects are. But I think that every time you say something very beautiful before, right? Becoming aware of the moment when you shrink, right? That's very precious information. That's not a problem that is surfing. That's not a limitation. That's information. That's pure data that your own body is giving to you, right? That your subconscious is presenting to you. Now, that's information you want to look at, because within that, it's the circle of your next step in the growth, right? So someone can stay there and say, oh, I'm still small and it's not linear and I'm growing. It's 1 step forward and 2 back, and and pity yourself. That's one way of doing it. Or you say, fantastic, I'm so glad this showed up. I never realized that I was shrinking in this occasion. What's going on? And that's where you will grow, right? If I can share just a small experience, I had that a few years ago, not a long time ago, when I was already in these tools for a while, and during a conference, a workshop, a CEO just went, how I perceived it, pretty violent on me, pretty abusive on how he just opposed and resisted what I was saying. And I just shrunk, I just became small, insecure. I couldn't know how to move forward. It was painful for the next hour until finally was home. But I said, wow, isn't that interesting? That happened. Why did it happen? I mean, it's not the first time you run a workshop. In general, you know how to do it. Why this? And it brought back memories of my adolescence with my professors at school, and a trauma that I had in terms of bullying at school from my professors, and that was still in my nervous system. It doesn't matter how much I have done, it was still there. And before someone that I perceived as authority, when they were aggressive, the Aldo 14 years came out and shrunk, right? Well, that was great information. That was beautiful. That for me was an epiphany. I'm eternally grateful to that guy who mistreated me during a workshop, because I then went and did the work, right? So but that's the work, right? So, when you do this, you don't have time to save the world, because it takes a lot of time and energy to save yourself, right? In the process, you also save the world. In the process, you bring peace to Israel and Palestine and to wherever you want to bring it, right? But it's by doing the work.
Beautiful. Save yourself and save the world through that. Well, we covered a lot of different ground here today, Aldo. I mean, it's just a beautiful dive. I think there's so much. I know our team is going to be like chopping up reels of this episode, and there's going to be a lot of cool little highlights to come out of this. And just the episode in general, I think is, hopefully, if you've been listening to this, you can find a lot of things that could be very helpful here. I'm curious, as we're kind of moving towards closing, if you were to kind of just let everything kind of settle in from what we've talked about here. I know you spend your time talking about this a lot, but if there's one thing that you would, from your heart, want to communicate to anyone who has the benefit, the blessing of listening to this at this moment, what is one thing you would want to share to be most helpful to people as they're moving into their life?
I would say, if you already have a sense of purpose, don't shy away from doing the hard work in order to become the person you need to become. And start at looking, with always keeping your gaze on the horizon where you want to end up, but do the work, so start using every data, as we said before, and information in order to do the work. If you are not clear on what your purpose, and actually that thought might arise some anxiety or overwhelm, I would say just forget about yourself and start finding the next little opportunity you have to listen to someone, to help someone, just to get out of yourself. I think that's really what also helps us to grow, which might sound contradictory with what Jai said, but it's not actually. Even your shadow comes up when you focus more on the other and how you can serve it, rather than just licking your wounds and pity yourself. So just get out of that pity yourself kind of mindset, right? Look for who around you, can you help right now? And I think that when you do that, that creates a virtual cycles that eventually will also reveal what your purpose is. And in the process, you do the work that is need to be done, which is the saving kind of work, right? And it's also, I want to be very honest, it's also painful. It's not easy, right? But it makes the whole difference in terms of fulfillment and happiness in life, I believe.
Thank you, Aldo, for that and for everything today. I can tell you that a lot is resonating with where I'm at right now, and my wheels are definitely turning, like you were saying, Gabe. Just thinking about ways to apply this, and so I just really appreciate your time, your perspective, your wisdom, and just a pleasure to have met you here.
No, thanks so much, Rahul and Gabe, and that was really. I always love to have this conversation with very meaningful questions that come from experience and not from a list of questions. That I could tell that there's a lot of experience and your own moments in life, and that helps me to to talk not about theory but also think about my experience and what I have learned and communicating. So it was also a gift for me because it helped me to think about my own journey as well.
Well, thank you so much, Aldo. And for folks who have been listening and joining us, thanks for following. And I hope you've gotten some benefit from this interaction, this conversation today. So if you do enjoy listening to us, again, please share this work with a friend, leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can join our newsletter to follow along the journey. You can also find out about Aldo in the show description. We'll link his website, his contact, and how you can get in touch with him if you like. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and we are wishing you the best in discovering your own massive transformative purpose, your own journey of going inside to connect and transform yourself to then make an impact in the world. And so we're wishing you the best in that journey, and we'll catch you next time. Take care.
Bye-bye.